Now it's time for the O'Hara News and Editorial. This is the show that brings you news through the lens of men's rights activism. Robert O'Hara and co-host James Huff bring you current events and important guests who will share their insights as well. We also invite the most important people to share their thoughts and experiences here on the one, you. This show invites callers to discuss the events of the week with the hosts and our guests. We want your involvement. So listen, call in, and experience the one show that gives it to you straight in a way no other media outlet will. Let's begin the O'Hara News and Editorial. Tonight, on the O'Hara News and Editorial, we have as our guest Patricia Lewis, author of the provocative article titled "Feminism Has Slain Our Protectors," featured on World News Daily this week. The article touched a nerve among MRAs and MGTOWs alike, and will be the centerpiece of the show. Miss Lewis has graciously accepted our offer to be on the show to talk about the subject of male utility and, as an extension, male disposability, why it is the measure of a man, and the concept of men abandoning this definition of manhood. Please join us tonight to engage in this very important discussion and also to express our gratitude towards Miss Lewis for participating in what is sure to be a somewhat uncomfortable discussion. And welcome back to another edition of the O'Hara News and Editorial with myself, Robert O'Hara, and our co-host, James Huff.
Hey!
Hello, everybody. James, how was your week?
Oh, rough week, man, so far.
Okay.
It just got started. It's already kicking me pretty hard. Things will get better.
Okay, good. Well, we won't get into the details, but everything is going to be all right, so that's good. It's been an interesting week this past week, and we just had, and this is going to be a great show, by the way. We got a wonderful guest, but before we say anything else, I know that there's a lot of people kind of rearing up for this show and eager to put their own 2 cents in and maybe even say some nasty things, but I want to admonish people to not be so brash during this show. We have Patricia Lewis, who is going to be joining us on this show tonight. She is the author of a very provocative article published in World News Daily 4 days ago, titled "Feminism Has Slain Our Protectors." And this show provoked the rage of men going their own way and men's rights activists, and rightfully so, because it definitely was an expose of male disposability and male utility and what it means to women and how important it is for women. And one could argue, as I will later on in the show, that this is a dehumanization of men and a denial of their humanity. Now, let us, and I'll talk about this before we get Patrice on, but I want to just try to pull back the reins a little bit. She was gracious enough to come on the show. We want to have this discussion with her. This is a very, very important discussion to have.
This needs to be a discussion.
Yes,
folks. This is not a rage fest.
No.
The O'Hara News and Editorial is the place for this type of discussion.
It is, yeah, exactly. I don't want this to be an ambush on anybody. I don't want that happening on my show. We are not a shock jock program. We don't get people on the show and ambush them and abuse them. That's not what we do here. We are about intelligent commentary and discussion, and we are very happy to have her here. She has agreed graciously to be here. I hope that this becomes a learning experience for her as well as to everybody listening. And I'm looking forward to it. But without a doubt, it's going to be awkward, to say the least.
Well, and I think that perhaps it's going to be awkward because we don't have very many opportunities to actually sit down with people from a differing viewpoint on our own shows.
Yes.
And actually discuss the issues with them. This is sitting down and actually having these discussions in the open needs to happen. We don't need to become an echo chamber. We need to be able to keep our arguments alive. And the only way to do that is to vet the argument against the opposition. And this is in the spirit of not just good debate, but good audience learning as well.
Absolutely. And again, I want to express my gratitude for Patricia Lewis joining us, and I hope that callers in express the same gratitude and that we see the same gratitude in the comment section, because it's always nice to have somebody come onto the show that is, and it is going to be like somebody jumping into the lion's den. There's no doubt about it, but let's make it a learning experience, people. So, having said that, it's time to get on to the news. This just tonight, we just learned that Thunderfoot, a.k.a. Dr. Phil Mason, had his Twitter account suspended because of Anita Sarkeesian and her mob, basically at their request, at their behest. And this is not surprising, given what's going on recently with Anita Sarkeesian. She has asserted that she's been under attack lately, that she's getting death threats, she's been forced away from her home, and a lot of people say that these threats are contrived by her to raise hysteria and, by extension, money. The article that I just published, which has already gotten quite a few views, by the way, reads, Thunderfoot has Twitter account suspended at behest of Anita Sarkeesian and Company. In a stunning example of internet censorship, famous YouTuber and Anita Sarkeesian critic, Dr. Phil Mason, otherwise known by his YouTube handle, Thunderfoot, has had his Twitter account suspended for alleged harassment. Dr. Mason has been perhaps the most effective and vocal critic of Sarkeesian, who has made a fortune lambasting the gaming industry as being misogynistic and perpetuating, quote, tropes concerning women and femininity. Recently, she is claimed to have been the victim of death threats, claims her critics say may be contrived. Dr. Mason has never, in any of his videos, threatened Sarkeesian or expressed any wish to see her harmed in any way. He points out in his latest video regarding his suspension from Twitter that having exposed herself to the free market of ideas, she should expect criticism. You try the open marketplace of ideas, and when you groundly get your ass handed to you in the open marketplace of ideas, you try to shift the goalpost, said Dr. Mason of the suspension. Quoting Tyrion Lannister, a character from the popular HBO series Game of Thrones, Dr. Mason said, "When you tear out a man's tongue, you are not proving him a liar. You are only telling the world that you fear what he might say." The video link is going to go in the chat room. Definitely a pretty interesting and significant development in this whole Anita Sarkeesian thing. This guy, Dr. Mason, is an outstanding commentator on feminism as it pertains to the gaming world and to the atheist community. Really a brilliant guy. I'd love to have him on the show sometime. I've been trying to get him on for quite some time now, but he has not agreed. Hard man to get a hold of.
I went ahead and dropped that into the chat room there.
Oh, thanks. Hard man to get a hold of, and I understand why he's a very busy guy. But this is something that shouldn't come as a surprise, given what's happening. Anita Sarkeesian is what they used to call a demagogue. Now I'm not quite sure if that's entirely accurate. She is a promoter of hysteria. She is a fraudster. I think this is becoming more and more patently obvious as time goes by. She has amassed a fortune on lambasting, of all things, the gaming industry and the tech industry for being misogynistic and perpetuating, all these feminist, all these feminist accusations we hear all the time. It's like misogyny, these tropes she keeps on talking about, which and her videos are just very, very sad and very stupid, and are easily picked apart even by people who are nowhere near as smart as this guy. I mean, you don't have to, and this guy is a genius, but you don't have to be a genius to really, really, really see through Anita Sarkeesian's bullshit. And it is bullshit. But she is in trouble right now. We don't know for sure, but she may be under investigation for wire fraud, which is huge. Which is huge. But I mean, seriously, I mean, you can't ignore the fact that this woman is a fraudster. I mean, all the evidence is there. Every single indication is there. She's a fraudster. She's used demagoguery to raise money, and now these threats that she says she's been receiving. And I tried to get this guy on the show tonight, but he wasn't able to do it. But there's a journalist out there who called the San Francisco Police Department. She lives in San Francisco, by the way, and asked if there was even a report of these death threats on the date that she said they came, on the date that she said she was driven from her house and she got the police involved, and there was no police report. There was one back in April, but there was no resolution to it. So we don't know what's happening with these police reports, and the indication is that these things are contrived. I mean, I don't know how else to express it. I mean, how else do you say, "Oh my God, I've been driven from my home. I'm getting these death threats," but there's no substantiation of these things. And when I say substantiation isn't just a screenshot. There has to be some. Because, seriously, if you receive a death threat on the internet, whether it be through Twitter or be on your YouTube channel or through email or on your Facebook page or whatever, that is incredibly easily traced. The police can trace that. It's the dumbest way to threaten somebody. Actually, it really is the dumbest. And when there's not even a police report, in addition to there, of course, not being any kind of tracing of where these threats come from, you have to ask yourself, is this contrived? Especially in face of the fact that this woman has made hundreds of thousands of dollars making these videos, making claims about female victimhood in the gaming industry and harassment of females in the gaming industry, and just, I mean, these stupid YouTube videos that she makes, they're just asinine. And people are what they're doing is they're criticizing her. They're saying, hey, we think you're full of shit. And that's all they're doing. Anita Sarkeesian, we think you're full of shit. That's all they're doing. So now what does she do? She accuses everybody of threatening her, sending her death threats. She is damseling. She has basically become the trope that she has said that she is. And it's sad. It's really sad. And I'm really disappointed in Twitter that they've done this. And I hope, we'll see what happens. I hope that they come to their senses. But Mr. Thunderfoot has a right to be upset, of course. And again, I hope he comes on the show sometime. But who knows? Maybe his YouTube channel's next. What do you think, James?
Oh, I hope so.
Well, I hope his YouTube videos get shut down. But I hope that Twitter comes to their senses.
Yeah, I think I don't think his YouTube videos will get shut down.
No.
But he had a pretty large following of people on Twitter, so I imagine this is probably upset him greatly.
Well, yeah, I mean, and for good reason, because he has he is the premier critic of Anita Sarkeesian, as well as a lot of other what I call feminist co-option schemes, especially in the atheist community. Rebecca Watson, notably, and other things are going on with that. And he is. Here's the thing, and Nick Redding from Men's Rights Edmonton has said this before, and it's true. Whenever someone is very effective in criticizing feminists, they are the ones who are targeted, not the people who actually threaten people or threaten to hurt or harm or steal or rob or break things. It's the people who are the most articulate in their criticism that get targeted, and this is a perfect example of this. So, but anyway, on to other news. There was National Public Radio created a series in recent weeks that was titled "What It Means to Be a Man in the 21st Century," and one of their episodes included Paul Elam, as well as Dr. Warren Farrell and our dear friend Dave Frutrell. It was, in my opinion, a very shallow piece, which did no justice to actually explaining or elucidating the men's rights movement or what we're all about. It was like most of the major media coverage that we've gotten, very one-dimensional, not in-depth, and I believe very actively hiding some of the serious issues that we talk about. But interestingly enough, on the 12th, 4 days ago, the very last of their series called Men in America aired on National Public Radio. And I'm going to play it for everybody here. And the title is called How to Be a 21st Century Gentleman. Come to your own conclusions.
Men. We've heard from a lot of them this summer. Single men, married men, men who are extra small, men who are extra large.
Men who don't eat meat, and men who love their cars.
Men who juggle work and family to a degree their forefathers never did.
Well, today our series on men comes to an end. But not before we address something that concerned many of you, whether you emailed us, tweeted, or posted a comment in an online discussion.
It's this question. What does it mean to act like a gentleman these days, especially on a date?
It's an aspect of modern life many of you characterized as confusing. If men and women aspire to operate as equals, does a man still pay the bill? Should he open a door? Pull out the chair? We asked NPR's Shireen Marisol Meraji to investigate.
Be a gentleman.
That old-timey voice is from a 1967 U.S. Navy instructional video called How to Succeed with Brunettes.
How about starting by being on time? Make it easy for her to slip into her coat. Yes, doors do offer an excellent chance to make a good impression. It's a way to show your respect for ladies.
I can open my own door. I don't see the point of opening at the door. Most of these doors are automatic anyways.
Now, that voice belongs to 18-year-old Chiamaka Njoku. She's a college freshman taking an etiquette class with other students at a restaurant in Los Angeles. They're all in college or college-bound and brushing up on how to behave during meals with prospective employers. It's taught by Rachel Isgar of Please Pass the Manners. She graciously let me interrupt for this story, and Chinonso Anokute was quick to express his frustration.
It's the opening the door thing. It's like, you're either getting an attitude with me, or like, I open it and you don't say thank you. It's like, I'm not opening this for no reason. I'm trying to be nice here. So,
Anna Putisata Yakul likes the old dating rituals, opening doors, pulling out chairs, and
I know a lot of guys don't like to carry girls' purses because they think it's too feminine, but I really appreciate when a guy will carry it for me.
Now remember Chiamaka Njoku, she's not into doors being opened for her, but
If a man wants to pay for the whole meal, I will not stop him.
Chris Polk II says all the different expectations and requests keep things interesting.
you gotta do research in order to be a gentleman with certain people. You have to ask so what do you like? I like it when so and so does this. Sometimes girls will drop hints I like this. Don't do that because it bothers me. So
if you're not good at picking up on cues like that, there are classes that may help. Deborah King founded the Final Touch Finishing School and has one coming up at the end of November in Dallas, Texas. It's called The Power of Being a Gentleman.
We actually have to close the conversation down about who should open the door because it can drag out because there's such confusion about it.
She says on a date, unless the woman says otherwise, the gentleman opens the door, and he offers to pay, suggests good options on the dinner menu, asks his date what she'd like to eat, and then places her order. King says she's been getting more requests from young people eager to bring back this kind of old-fashioned civility.
I am so excited. I think there has never been a better time in history to model being a lady and a gentleman.
Stephen Petro, a.k.a. Mr. Manners, says the definitions for lady and gentleman are outdated.
In the gay community, you didn't have that tradition to fall back on. And you can't say, well, it's this man or that man, or it's this woman or that woman.
Petro has a website dedicated to gay and lesbian etiquette and writes the civilities column for the Washington Post. And he says same-sex dating rules can help opposite-sex daters make sense of the confusion that accompanies changing gender roles.
Everyone listen up. The one who gets to the door first, please open the door for yourself and the person who's behind you.
He says take a cue from same-sex daters on paying, too. If you invite, you pay the bill. And Petro adds, if gestures like pulling out chairs and helping with coats are done with the right intentions, there's no harm in trying.
Respect, kindness, and civility. Guys, ask yourself, does it fit into one of those three? And if it does, then you're cool.
Consideration for others. Kindness. This is being a gentleman.
See, there are a couple of things that haven't changed since 1967. Shireen Marisol Meraji, NPR News.
Enjoy, but be in good taste. Show respect.
Stephen Petro answers more questions.
So
Really?
yeah, for real. I mean, clearly, they did this whole series on what it means to be a man in America.
And this is how they end it.
There seems to be some confusion about it now. Ooh, confusion. And they end the entire series with how to make yourself a tool. Just what is this?
Wow.
But in this video, they actually on the webpage, they actually featured the video from 1967, which is hysterical, by the way. How to Succeed with Brunettes. That the U.S. Navy actually produced for its officers. My mom and dad got married in 1963, but I'm definitely going to ask my dad about this video because I think it's absolutely hysterical. It's amazing to me.
Well, you know,
I mean, for real, and it's you have the people they featured that they interviewed. You of course have the women waxing nostalgic. Well, some not so much, but many women actually waxing nostalgic of when men carried purses and opened doors and paid for things, and the men who make money. Having classes and websites and whatnot, and we know who these people are, actually having classes and websites that teach men how to be, quote, gentlemen, and how to be this utility for their women. Very, very interesting. Well, unsurprised. Actually, no, it's not interesting. It's unsurprising and predictable that NPR actually closed their series about what it means to be a man in the 21st century with this. And it's disappointing. I had hoped that they would do something more insightful, but they
couldn't afford to.
They'd lose half their audience, more than half their audience. If they had really let loose and let Warren Farrell and Paul Elam say what they really did say or wanted to say during their interviews, NPR would go out of business overnight.
Yep, sure would.
They would.
Oh, hold on just a minute. We've got a caller here.
Okay, cool. What we got?
Hello, caller.
Hi, this is Patrice Lewis.
Hello.
Patrice, how are you doing tonight?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Good. I'm glad you called. We do have to go to a music break before we get you on, because that's our format. So I'm glad you called. James, can we do that right now, and then we can talk?
Yep, folks,
three of us.
I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of soft listening.
Alrighty. And we're back with Patrice Lewis, who is a columnist for World News Daily and has written a very provocative article titled "Feminism Has Slain Our Protectors," which has really struck a nerve with people in the men's rights movement and in the MGTOW community. And I couldn't help but email her and ask her to join us the other day, and she has so graciously decided to join us. Patricia, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, your article was published on four days ago, on the 12th, and currently it has well over 250 comments, many of which came from men's rights activists and people from the Men Going Their Own Way community. And when I talked with you earlier on today, you confessed your ignorance to these movements, both the men's rights movements and the Men Going Their Own Way community, and which I thought was interesting, and I think would make for an interesting show, and hopefully something that would be informative to both you and to our listeners. But first, let's go over this article just for listeners' sake. I'm pretty sure everybody listening right now has already read the article. And you open the article with saying you admire men. Specific, and I'm going to read. I'm actually kind of go. I'm going to try to itemize the article. It's not a very long one, and ask you to comment as we go and engage in some conversation about it. You open up the article saying, with the first sentence, "I admire men." Specifically, I admire men who are controlled, confident, and who fulfill their biological destiny as protectors and providers. Men are essential for training boys to tame the testosterone and channel their natural strengths and aggressiveness in appropriate ways. Trained men are, in the words of columnist Dennis Prager, the glory of civilization. In parentheses, it goes without saying that untrained men are its scourge, but that's another column. Men, trained, manly men, are necessary for a balanced society. They take on the tough, ugly, hard jobs women can't or won't do. They mine our coal and fight our fires and protect our shores and fix our engines and rescue our butts when we're in danger. They truck our goods and clean our pipes and wire our homes. They plow fields and grow food. They butcher livestock so we can buy meat in tidy, sanitized packages in the grocery store and pretend it never came from a cow. Now, I'm going to continue on with the article as we go, but the picture that you paint of men, as many of our listeners and readers of AVFM would agree, both men and women alike, is one of, and I hate to sound abrupt, but it is one of inhumane or non-human utility. And this is an issue that many people in the men's rights movement, and many men, and many men going their own way, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, this community of men going their own way, who shun this concept of male utility and disposability and usefulness to specifically women. It's something that really, 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 really strikes a nerve. And I want to ask you, first and foremost, like, I'm just going to throw it right out there, is your concept of man as a man an inhuman utility that is to be utilized or exploited in some instances?
Exploited, absolutely out of the question.
Okay.
Utilized as far as their natural gifts and abilities go, sure, insofar as it's a voluntary thing. Now, I'm not talking that men should be roped into occupations they detest, they loathe, anything like that, although many men do find themselves in those occupations, and they do so for a sense of duty, a sense of providing for family. Perhaps there's no other jobs available besides mining coal or something that's very dangerous work. So now a couple of questions I might ask back at you. If, the list that I gave here, which was they mine our coal and fight our fires and protect our shores and fix our engines, they clean our pipes, wire our homes, truck our goods, yada, yada, yada. If they don't do them, who does? These are all necessary duties, necessary jobs. Somebody has to do them, and presumably they're done because they pay reasonably well.
Right.
And so the question is, if women aren't going to step up and do them, are men? In other words, somebody's got to do them, because these cannot yet be assigned to robots. But because it's men who tend to take on those jobs, far more than women do, my argument is they deserve our praise and our gratitude for it. They're doing some ugly work a lot of women won't do, or think they're too good to do, which drives me nuts, but that's a different issue.
Okay,
so these are jobs that cannot be farmed out, because they're only farmed out to other men.
Correct. Fair enough, and that's a very satisfactory response to what I just proposed to you. What about men who cannot or will not do those jobs? Are they less than men for not doing that?
As opposed to what, holding, say, white-collar jobs?
Or let's say, for instance, someone who decides to be underemployed or who just lives for themselves.
I have no problems with that under a few conditions. One is that they're not sponging off the government.
Okay. Because
I don't have any patience for people who sponge off the government on purpose. Now, it's one thing if you simply cannot find work, you're desperate, you need to take welfare or temporary assistance, that's what it's there for. But those who choose to stay underemployed in order to sponge off the government, sorry, I don't think much of that, man or woman, that's just not right. Now, but for those who choose to stay underemployed because they're going to, you hear about people who, like you probably heard about the tiny house movement. I don't know, it's big on the West Coast. I don't know about the East Coast, where people will build these little micro homes, things like that, and they try to live as small and uninterrupted or a lifestyle that is not very that doesn't take a lot of utilities. More power to them. However, and this is another codicil, it depends on what obligations a man has. Does he have a wife? Does he have children? Because those are factors that have to be considered when a man decides to go off and do his own thing. I don't have a problem with men doing their own thing. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's your life. Go for it. But when you take on the voluntary obligation of a family, then a man must step up and act as a provider and a protector. This isn't to say women shouldn't be working. I'm not saying that at all. Don't get me wrong. But particularly where children are concerned, children are the innocent and unemployable offspring. And the men, well, both parents, of course, need to be there to provide and protect for them. And so it's usually, under traditional circumstances, it's usually the man who steps up to do that.
Okay, this is an interesting segue into something that I had planned to bring up later on, but since you brought up the stepping up to taking care of children part, I feel that it's a good time to bring this up. We live in a society where women have reproductive rights and men don't. Women have control of their fertility and men don't. And because of this, and because of the fact that included in a woman's reproductive rights is the right to force a man into parenthood who did not want who may, in many cases, and some would argue most cases, didn't want to be a parent to begin with, simply because they had sex.
Well, how did the man become a parent to start with?
Well, now I'm sure that you're going to say this because and you can be forgiven because most people say this because he had sex, but she had sex as well. But
right.
She also has reproductive rights and complete control over whether or not, most women do, have complete control over whether or not they become pregnant in the first place. Men do not have this control. This is a crucial argument.
It is a crucial argument. Now, let me preface my reply by saying that what we had talked about earlier, and this is what I gather is the men's rights movement, where the court system is ridiculously skewed and now in favor of women. And I find that appallingly bad. So I should preface my reply by saying I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I must also preface my reply by saying I do not believe that abortion should be publicly funded.
Right.
And I do not believe that abortion should be undertaken as a method of birth control.
Your preface is extremely well taken. Very, very well
presumably
taken.
Both parties who entered into a sexual relationship have done so voluntarily.
Right.
Therefore, the man is 50% responsible for what follows. He knows. What you were saying earlier, that men cannot control their fertility. Of course they can. Pardon the vulgarity of the term, they just keep their wick zipped.
Okay.
But also,
okay.
but women
please.
are also responsible for controlling their fertility. You keep your legs crossed. It's not that hard.
Okay. Great.
Until marriage, of course.
Oh, well, okay. I understand where you're coming from, and your point is very well taken. However, women can opt out of parenthood where men cannot opt out of parenthood. We can't do that after sex. If a man has been lied to, and this happened, now let's just, again, pardon my vulgarity here, men are often lied to, and some would say very often lied to, about their partner's fertility status. Oh, I'm on the pill, or I can't have kids, or I'm already pregnant with your baby, even though they may not be already pregnant with their baby. And then they engage in sex, which is a natural urge that human beings have. And then all of a sudden, they're in this situation where their female partners can walk away from parenthood, not just by abortion, but by giving their child up for adoption too. But they do not have this choice. Men do not have the choice in doing this. And this discrepancy, I shouldn't say discrepancy, but this differentiation, this really absurd differentiation of reproductive rights and responsibilities between men and women is a huge problem for men. And we can certainly talk about old-fashioned morals all that we want to, but this is a crucial problem that men face.
Well, I agree with you there, and it goes back to the idea that men are being treated unfairly in the court system. Now, that's clearly a problem beyond my scope of ability to solve. I can only agree with you, because it's not fair. However, it does not negate the fact that the man was procreating outside of the bounds of matrimony. You can call that old-fashioned if you want, but you must admit it solves a lot of problems, that they keep the things under control until a ring is on the finger. Now, issues after marriage, that's a whole different thing, and that's something I hope we discuss later on in this interview. But you're going to be, it's as old as trick as women have been in existence, to lie to the men and say whatever the men want to hear in order to continue with sexuality. So you'd think men would learn by now that women can't be trusted when it comes to this, because women will lie for whatever their nefarious reasons are. I don't agree with it, I don't like it, but it's the truth. So the guys have to be on their guard because, take whatever precautions are necessary to make sure that a pregnancy is not going to result.
Okay, all right. Now, this brings me to the next thing I want to bring up. And I love bringing this up to women to women specifically who bring up this argument. It comes from your angle, which I respect. How do you feel about men having control, or the same amount of control over their fertility as women?
Well, you'll have to expand on that. What kind of control do you mean?
Well, there are some things coming down the pipe that will enable men to control their own fertility. In other words, a discrete method in which men can choose to become infertile. And when I say discrete, I mean no one else makes the decision but them. Women have a discrete method women have 12 discrete methods of fertility control, including the pill, including IUDs and diaphragms and other ways where they make this decision to become infertile at any particular time in their bathroom or at their doctor's office or whatever, that men don't have. Men have this thing called a condom, which both partners know is being used or not being used. But coming up pretty soon now, there may be a method, or a device, or a drug in which, through which men can exercise discrete control of their fertility, thereby exercising.
On the market?
They're thinking, well, Vasogel is good. They're saying 2017 is a, and they're
Go for
pretty
it.
confident.
No,
Okay,
I'm serious. This, I think, is a marvelous thing. Because as you say, I could preach morality till I'm blue in the face. It's not going to change anybody's mind. I think that people who engage in sex need to be ready for any repercussions that result in that. But if there are essentially male birth control pills, for sake of, however you want to phrase it, go for it.
Okay.
Good for them for controlling themselves.
Good.
I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I wish it were on the market right now, and I wish more men would use it.
I mentioned men going their own way, which is probably a concept which you may or may not have heard of. Have you heard of this before?
I had not. Now, explain to me precisely what it is.
Men going their own way. Typically, a man going his own way is a man who has analyzed the situation, the relationships between men and women, and has decided that having a relationship, a marriage specifically, typically a marriage, but even in many cases, even having an intimate relationship with a woman, or especially even living with a woman under the same roof with a woman, has decided that is just not a good way to go for legal reasons, of course. There are many, many dangers and pitfalls that men face when they are married, and you brought this up with the divorce situation and what happens to men when they get divorced, with the child custody and of course things we haven't talked about yet, like alimony, but also even just living under the same roof with a woman, with the Violence Against Women Act. Men who choose to live with a woman give up many of their basic constitutional rights. So many men have decided to go their own way and not participate in relationships as men once did in the past with women. And it goes beyond the legal thing. Many of these men going their own way question the benefits that many people would say men have when they get into a relationship with a woman. This idea that you're going to have intimate companionship all the time, and that this is really a great thing for you, and you're going to live longer, as this argument that we hear all the time, and just this entire concept of as men being the protector and providers is something that is used in an exploitative way by both society and women.
Well,
and that's not a good deal. That's not a good deal. And there are many men, like myself, who have gone their own way and have found peace and happiness without buying into this idea of being with a woman. And it's not.
Let me start by relating a short story.
Sure.
Back in about it was probably 93 or so. My husband and I got married in 1990. We just had our 24th anniversary. And we moved to a different state, and I was going to graduate school. And so on the first day of this one class that I had, for whatever reason, the instructor said, turn to the person behind you and introduce yourself and tell them something about yourself. It's an icebreaker. Okay, fine. So I turned around. Now, you understand, I was 30 years old and a married woman by this point, and I'm in class with a much younger crowd, in their early 20s. And so I turned to the young lady sitting behind me and tell her something about myself. Her words to me was that what she was telling me about herself is she was engaged to be married. And I said, you are going to love being married. I said, it is the best-kept secret in the world. It's absolutely wonderful. And she got the most extraordinary look on her face, a look of relief. And she said, you have no idea how happy I am to hear that. Everyone's been telling me how awful it's going to be, the old ball and chain, blah, blah, blah. And that little conversation stuck with me ever since, because so many people go into marriage with the expectation of unhappiness. And all you got to do is write a column like I write, and then you get the emails pouring in from men who have had horrible marriages and horrible experiences with the, woman they're living with, a woman they're engaged with, a woman they're married to, children being ripped away from them, alimony out the wazoo. I mean, everything that you could possibly imagine. You hear these horror stories, and it can go one way or the other. I would never, ever blame a man for, as you put it, going his own way. It's a minefield out there with women who do not know how to be women. And that's what I get pissed off with feminists, because frankly, they don't know how to be women. They don't know how to be wives. And, what I was saying in my column about how men need to train boys to become good men, women need to train girls as well. I'm not saying, please do not mistake me, I'm not saying that every woman's destiny is to be a wife and a mother. Please don't get into that whole argument. But I am saying that it behooves older women to show younger women that marriage is not something to exploit men. It's not something to use as a battering ram. It's something to use as a mutual service to each other. And marriages that employ those principles are unspeakably happy. And I am blessed beyond measure to have one of those marriages, but so do my parents, so did my grandparents. So do so many women around me. It just so happens that I think rural America, maybe, I don't know, seems to have a higher concentration of long-term, stable, happy marriages. So this is what I mentioned earlier when I spoke to you today. That's the perspective I'm seeing. I'm seeing very happy women, and I'm seeing very happy men. However, that said, I have seen enough ugliness in this world that I wouldn't blame any man for fighting shy of a relationship, a long-term relationship, because of these things that happen. Now, that again assumes the man has no children that he has the responsibility to care for.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't want to be too inquisitive here, but you definitely, and this is understandable. You have described marriage in large part from the viewpoint of women, where you were talking about this experience you had at college, where you were talking with a young woman, much younger woman who was about to get married, and how she was so relieved to hear you say that this is a wonderful thing. But as you said, the best kept secret. And also this idea that older women need to train women to be better women, and men need to train men to be better men, so they can be better. So they can be more compatible together and more happy together in life.
Well, no. Let me back that up a little bit.
Sure.
I believe that older people should train the younger generation of what their expectations are and their responsibilities and duties are if they enter into relationships.
Okay.
If they don't, all bets are off. I just ask you not to create kids.
Right.
But I learned the example of stability in a marriage from my own parents who've been married, 56 years and counting. My grandparents were married 57 years, I think, before my grandmother passed on. But interestingly, my husband did not come from that kind of stable background. He came from, his parents were divorced. So he never had that long-term stability that I had growing into it. But he is a man who takes very seriously what he sees as a duty. If you're becoming a husband, you have a duty toward your family and your children. And so based on what I learned how to treat a man when I was growing up, we've had a very happy relationship, a very, very happy marriage. And see, this is what we have 2 daughters, and they're teenagers, 16 and 18. And this is what they've grown up seeing, is how a woman treats a man. Respectfully, lovingly, with appreciation, never holding anything over his head, never nagging, don't hold any grudges. I mean, these are not admirable traits in a woman, but they're very common.
What? Okay,
so it behooves older women to teach younger women how to treat men.
Now, there are many different theories as to why things are the way they are right now, why things are so dangerous for men right now. You brought up the minefield analogy, which is an analogy and specifically Paul Elam has used in the past. He did a brilliant...
It's an apt analogy, I think.
Yeah, he did a brilliant YouTube video about why men should not get married. And he compared marriage to drinking a bottle of tequila and walking through a minefield. And the numbers... and it's true. It's true. The numbers are just that accurate. So we have this situation here legally, where if a man even just so much as moves in with a woman, he is in incredible danger of losing everything he has: his freedom, his money, his job, his relationship with his family, and men are starting to avoid relationships with women now. And this is true. The numbers prove this. This is actually happening. There is a marriage strike going on right now. And we have, and your response to this is, well, men have to treat women better. I'm sorry. Scratch that. Women have to treat men better.
Scratch that one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Women have to treat men better, and men have to live up to their, quote, biological roles as provider and protector. And
okay, let me stop you right there. Their biological roles as provider and protector in a marriage, or if you're going to call it a committed relationship, because you have that responsibility for the children you helped create.
Okay. Let's say a guy gets married or whatever, and for whatever reason he is now unable to take care of business. He's unable to work. He gets some sort of illness or something like that, or if he decides that he wants to stay home and take care of the kids and make his wife work and be the primary breadwinner. How do you feel about that?
Well, power to him. As long as it's mutually agreed upon, go for it. There's been a number of cases where, for whatever reason, a man is tired of the 9-to-5 grind, and my gosh, I can't blame him. Right. And the woman lands a job that pays very, very well, and they've swapped roles. Great. I don't have a problem with that at all. Somebody's there taking care of the kids. Somebody is there taking responsibility for the lives they have created. Great. No issues at all.
And I want to reiterate, as you said that, as I said earlier on, currently, and this is a huge issue, this differentiation between reproductive control and reproductive rights between men and women. Men don't have a discrete way of controlling their fertility. Men don't have reproductive rights, and this is a huge, huge thing. And you've said that that if men did have a way to control their fertility, more power to them. Reproductive rights, of course, you're against abortion. That's fine. I appreciate that. But we have to acknowledge the fact that men are way, way behind as far as rights in this regard are concerned.
Interestingly, though, that falling behind is only a product of the last
40 years.
The last 30 or 40 years, pretty much since the 70s. I mean, it was kind of growing since the 50s.
Well, what I like to say is that since 1972, women alone have had every single live childbirth that has occurred here in the U.S. and in other places has been the result of a unilateral decision of a woman to become a parent. And included in this reproductive right is the right to force someone else into parenthood. And this is a huge deal. This is huge.
Okay, now we'll have to go back. We'll have to go back because there are, the man was not forced into bed with that woman.
Oh, see, here we go.
Again,
go ahead.
Once again, you're going to have to understand that both parties need to accept responsibility when they hop in the sack together. Now, this isn't to say I think it's fair. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't think it's fair. I think men are getting the shaft on this. But when you chose, and it was a voluntary act to get in the sack with a woman, you have to understand that there may be repercussions. That's why I think the idea of a man being able to control his fertility is spiffy. I think it's great.
Okay, good.
I mean, I don't, approve of people hopping in the sack all over the place. But as you say, morality aside, at least there would not be the risk of creating a new life under circumstances which are going to be ugly for both parties.
Okay, because women have this ability to opt out of parenthood through abortion and through getting their kid up for adoption, why is it that men don't have the same ability to say, okay, I don't want to be forced into parenthood, so I'm giving up all rights and responsibilities to resultant children from this sexual act?
I wish he could.
It's
but
easy
I
to
wish
do.
he would make that. Let me finish. But I wish he would make that clear, signed and sealed if necessary, before he had sex.
Okay, so shouldn't it be made clear? Shouldn't it be a default? Shouldn't there be and I'm trying to find the best way to word this. Shouldn't there be a default clarity in this regard, in where if a woman were to sue for child support or to apply for state assistance, in which case the man would be forced to pay child support if she applied for state assistance to the tune of, I think it's $1,200 a month in most cases. And this is wage slavery. If you don't pay this, you go to jail. And this
right. Oh, I know.
You just get paid.
You're not going to find me defending this kind of inequity.
Okay, good. But in this case, how do you feel? And I think this is the best way to go. Where if a woman sues for child support or applies for state aid, that she has to provide two things. Number one, DNA proof that the child is in fact the biological child of the man that she is naming the father, and a written instrument of consent. In other words, a contract, basically, a piece of paper that says, I agree to be the parent of this child. So, and I have these expressed rights and responsibilities, and therefore he gets to negotiate the conditions under which he agrees to this parenthood thing. Don't you think that is reasonable? And I believe that if we had such a paradigm in place, that it would reduce the amount of out-of-wedlock pregnancies and out-of-wedlock childbirths, and each child would be a wanted child. I mean, what is this idea of, like, just by having sex with someone that you consent to parenthood, only for men but not for women? Women do not consent to parenthood when they have sex. After sex, women have all kinds of options to get out of it. Women can abandon their children even up to the age of 15 and not face any repercussions at all. The only thing a man has to do is have sex, and then he's by default a parent. What do you think about this idea of reproductive rights for men, where a man can assert his reproductive rights even if he has sex with a woman?
Well, you can't force a man cannot force a woman to have an abortion. That is
no one's
something
saying that. No, No, no
Okay,
one's
yeah,
saying that.
as long as we're clear on that, and you already know how I feel about abortion to begin with. The idea of requiring a woman to give a DNA sample to prove that the man is the father, I think that's the best concept I've ever heard. I think that it absolutely, unequivocally should be in place.
Yes,
Now,
there are
the
men
idea of
in
having
jail right now for failure to pay child support on children that are
right.
not.
No, that is it's totally wrong. That is totally wrong. Now, I have a case I could discuss here if we have time later on that kind of deals with that sort of situation. But no, as far as having the man prove that he is the biological father, I think that should be that should be a built-in component of child support, so far as I'm concerned.
Yes. It's not in most cases. It's not.
Yeah, I think that's
we can both agree that this is an abhorrent state of affairs in this case. It's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, unquestionably. And we've already made it clear. I think that the court system is wildly and ridiculously skewed toward women because it's so dominated by feminist thought. It's always the man's fault. It's always the man's fault. Well, women have to take responsibility if they want the equality. And that's a whole different interview. But what you touched on earlier about the idea of having a written contract in place, I don't think that's realistic. If you're, before we hop in the sack, here, sign this, would you, hon? That kind of thing.
No,
it's unlikely to happen.
This can happen.
I think it'd be great if
this
it
only
did.
happens as she goes to court to sue for child support or state assistance. This can happen after the child's born, before the child's born, before they even have sex, whenever. But she has to approach this guy on equal footing and say, hey, I want to be a parent and I want you to be a co-parent. So
what guy is going to agree with that?
Someone who might want to be. There are guys out there who want to be parents. And there are guys who
in that case, get married and be a parent. I have no problems with it.
Okay.
I think it's irresponsible to have an out-of-wedlock child because it opens up a whole can of worms, and it's going to complicate your life.
The choice of having an out-of-wedlock child is up to the women. It's up to the female. Women have reproductive rights. Men don't have reproductive rights. And this
okay, now see, we're going in circles because I have to remind you that the man agreed voluntarily to climb into bed. However,
well, so did she. She had sex too. Do women not have sex when they when they?
Oh yeah, no. Let me finish. However, the woman is just as responsible for creating a life. But the thing is nobody seems to understand the concept of if you don't want these complications, stop having sex. Why is this so unheard of? It used to be that was the norm in society, and out-of-wedlock births were very rare as a result. But, man, you start having people say, hey, I'm free to have sex everywhere, and this started with the feminists who said, I'm going to have just as much sex as the men are.
Okay.
And that was the genesis of all these issues.
Okay,
because they started saying it doesn't matter. I'm going to have sex all I want. And then the men got caught up in this maelstrom of agony with lives they helped create and innocent lives who were caught up in this battle. And that's where it got ugly.
Okay.
I will place a huge amount of this on the feminist movement.
Okay,
which is how that whole column got started.
Okay, I have to confront you on this, and I don't mean to be abrupt, but first of all, both men and women have equal sex drives, in my experience, and women have this ability to choose to have sex and not pay the consequences, and men don't. This is where
that falls back on the inequalities in the court system.
Okay, yeah. So if we have if women have these reproductive rights, the ability to get an abortion, and also fertility control, neither of which men have, then and these are easy problems to fix, especially with reproductive rights, where if a woman chooses to have a baby and it is her choice to give birth, to become a parent, where it's not, men do not have this choice to the extent that women do. There's nowhere near.
Now, are you saying that if the man is proven to be the biological father, are you saying that he should have the right to abandon all contact, financial support, and everything to do with the child?
Every bit as much so as the mother has.
So what happens to the child?
Well, either the child gets aborted or the child gets put up for adoption.
See, I think adoption is just the best thing in the world.
Well, yeah. Well, and when a man, if this were the case, where a man says, I give up all rights and responsibilities to this child, it's basically tantamount to giving the child up for adoption. And the woman, the mother, again, she has a choice. She still has choices at this point. She can either raise the child on her own with her family or whatever, or entirely on her own, or in turn give the child up for adoption. Now, if we had this in place where a man could say, listen, I give up all rights and responsibilities to this child, don't you think that would change things for the better for children? Where if a woman said, okay, I have complete control over whether or not I get pregnant and whether or not I have a baby and whether or not I give the child up for adoption, so I should really, really, really think really hard about who I have sex with.
I would like to think that would happen, but see, part of the problem is it gets a little more complicated than just the feminist movement. A lot of the issues that have arisen in the last 40, 50 years with unwanted children and, coming down hard on men for, lifelong child support for one night of sex and things like this, a lot of it has to do with the notion that society is going to provide for the unwanted pregnancies. Now, this is a whole different can of worms. I'm just going to touch on it briefly. But it's kind of rewarding bad behavior. If a woman says, I'm going to have sex, I don't care if I get pregnant because the state will support me. And the man can say, great, night's orgasm, goodbye. And, then he's out the door.
Here's the thing, like they say, here's a crucial thing that a lot of people forget. I'm sorry to interrupt you. But, yes, the woman can say the state will support me, but what the state will do is to literally put a gun at the man's head, whomever the man is that the woman names as the father, and say, give us money every single month or else you're going to go to jail.
Right.
Even if he didn't want to become a parent in the first place. And she has the choice as to whether or not she becomes a parent. He does not have this choice after the act of sex.
He did have the choice to refrain from climbing into bed, but we've already covered that territory.
So did she, but she also had the choice of abortion, giving the child up for adoption, and this is huge. And she also had the choice of, she has the ability to control her fertility. It's the differentiation. That's what I'm talking about. This is huge. Men should have reproductive rights on par with women's.
But until men can control their fertility with this drug treatment that you were mentioning that I think is a great idea, until that happens, men have to understand there is a risk.
Why don't we tell women that there's a risk? That they might have to raise a kid on their own.
It used to be that women had to face that same risk. In fact, their risk was much bigger because they had no way to control their fertility.
Then, there were no out-of-wedlock childbirths and whatnot. But now we have this business where basically men have become enslaved when it comes to reproduction. And
see how complicated this has become? This has become insanely complicated because women and men are not putting sex in the right location. And the sex in the right location is within the bounds of wedlock. It used to be, the old joke about the shotgun wedding when, the guy got the girl pregnant and so he was forced to marry her. Well, the thing is they knew that was a possibility. And so they wouldn't have sex, at least, outside of a house of prostitution or something. They wouldn't have sex with a girl because they didn't want to be forced into a shotgun marriage. And meanwhile, girls were not having sex outside of marriage because they didn't want to face this thing. This whole thing has gotten remarkably complex and complicated and unfair.
Okay, so don't you think
and
that
children, because people are not keeping their legs crossed.
Okay, so don't you think that if men had parity of reproductive rights with women through the device I said, where like there's being a written an instrument of consent, as I said, don't you think that women, the sexual behavior and reproductive behavior of women who have complete 100% control over their reproductive agency that men don't have, don't you think that would change? Don't you think that we would see a lot?
I think it would change a great deal, yeah.
Okay.
In other words, what it's forcing people to understand, the whole idea of women being able to sue for state support, which of course comes through the man and, this, that, and the other, or women who are abandoned, having welfare, or women having multiple children out of wedlock, all these complications. It all comes down to, and this comes down to both genders, it all comes down to a lack of responsibility.
Yeah.
You have the ability to control your own behavior. You cannot control anybody else's behavior. And this is, I don't know if you know that I have a book I published several years ago called The Simplicity Primer. And the whole idea behind it is that your life is an accumulation of the choices that you make. For the most part. I mean, obviously there are things beyond your control. But for the most part, men who, for example, choose to stay single, and how did you call it? Not withdraw. What was the term you used? Stay out of it or something? More power to them. That is a choice they make in order to simplify their lives. People who choose not to have sex before marriage are making a decision that will simplify their lives because they're not having out-of-wedlock children. People who choose to sleep around are going to get complications that they could have avoided had they made the right choices. This all comes down to people refusing to take responsibility for the choices they make, the voluntary choices that they make.
Okay, but you must concede that women have reproductive rights, men don't. Women have.
Oh yeah, but see, that goes back to the skewed court system. I don't agree with.
And also with fertility control for women and none for men, and whatnot. But anyway, I hate to interrupt. We have Hannah Wallen with us right now, a revered honey badger. Hannah, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Wonderful. You have a question for Patrice.
Well, I'm kind of wondering how you can get that welfare rewards bad behavior and not get that the child support system does exactly the same thing.
Well, look at it this way. What would happen if welfare didn't exist?
If welfare didn't exist, there would be more people actively seeking work, and there would be fewer drain on the people who produce jobs.
And it would influence the people who might otherwise get welfare for mistakes they made. So let's say, for example, that you screwed up. You had a baby out of wedlock. You can't get welfare because it doesn't exist. I'm just, raising the what-ifs. Your life has become a living hell because you've got to...
Well, that's not actually true.
Well, let me finish. Your life becomes very complicated because you have
I had
a
baby out of wedlock.
Can I finish? Your life becomes very difficult because you have this baby out of wedlock. Because you can't get welfare, do you choose, and remember, this is a choice, to have another baby out of wedlock? And another? And another? No, of course not. Your life is difficult because you had a baby out of wedlock. So now what you need to do is make choices in the future that will not further complicate your life, i.e. more children out of wedlock. Instead, and I'm assuming this is what you did, you took that child, you raised him or her as best you could, you worked very hard, you took as little welfare or assistance from the government as you could get away with, and you raised this child with dignity.
I got a job and got things straightened out and married the father of my child because we had planned that. But everything you've said about welfare is true about child support. It is the same story. And all that the child support system does is make men responsible for women they have sex with, while women are not responsible at all if they have sex.
So let's say that you have a child with man A out of wedlock, and you get child support from him. And then you have another child out of wedlock from man B, and you get child support out of him. Is that what you're saying, that they can just go around getting serial child support? I'm not really familiar with how child support works.
Actually, women can do that. They can get child support from each guy, and they, in fact, my husband's ex-wife collected child support. She left him for another man, collected child support, quit her job, got more child support because she quit her job. Now, see, the child support system supported that, though. That's child support law. Then the second thing is, because he is considered more responsible than she is, when she chose to have children with her second husband, her responsibility for her children with her first husband reduced, and his child support went up further. So he had, essentially, he paid child support for children that were not his. Not as much as he paid for his own children. Now, the thing to know about this is That's just all in the context of marriage. By the way, she married a minister. But that's all in the context of marriage.
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed.
Well, it's true. So I mean, everybody's fallible, and there's no hard feelings now. Obviously, there were quite a bit in the past, but all of us have had to work and grow over the last, well, almost. It's been more than 16 years. All of us have had to learn and grow because of the situations that we've put ourselves in, and all of us. All four of us adults involved, and all of the children went through hardship because of the decisions that were made by the adults. But the thing to know is many of those decisions would not have occurred had the child support system not existed. Now, my decision would have, but many of hers would not. She would not have quit her job if she couldn't get more child support. There were several other decisions that were made that were made because she knew she could draw on the child support system. And many young women do the same thing. In fact, 88.9%, according to the last census, 88.9% of non-working custodial parents in the United States are mothers. Now, there are custodial single parents who are fathers. Approximately 15% of all custodial single parents in the United States are fathers, 14.7%. Most of them are at or above the poverty level, 80%, whereas 37% of custodial single mothers are below the poverty level, and 35% of them are unemployed. So there's a pattern here. When men get custody of their children as single parents, they do not usually collect child support in the amount that women do. And there's a blogger named Dalrock that actually published some statistics from the census also on that. I believe it was a previous census, and he compared that to one before it. But the upshot of what he found going through the numbers was fathers are not just less likely to get custody of their children, they're also less likely to get child support, and when they do get child support, the award is lower. And what I found looking at the custodial single parents numbers in the census is that even when unemployed, meaning they've lost their jobs, or not in the workforce, meaning they either own their own business or are living on other wealth that they've got built up, fathers are generally above the poverty level. Far more fathers are above the poverty level than mothers. So if I were to come up with a solution for the problem of unwed poverty, custodial unwed poverty, I would say give custody to the dads. Default custody, if a woman becomes pregnant outside of wedlock, that she does not get to keep the baby unless she can prove that she can support the child without child support and without welfare. Give custody to the dads.
Well, I see your issue there. Of course, the question would arise whether the father is able to take responsibility and B, would be a good parent. I mean, there's some pretty steady people out there.
Statistically, he is.
Well, but the thing is, you can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. But what you address, however, is the disparity of the court system that either unfairly rewards a woman for custodial having custody of the children at the expense of the father, the literal expense of the father. But it also addresses that they're not taking into consideration certain issues, i.e. the woman deliberately putting her job that she can qualify for higher alimony or whatever for things like this. But there's also on the other side of the equation where the man will quit his job in order that he won't have to pay child support. I mean, it's not a clean-cut system no matter which side you look at.
Well,
but
the problem with that is they go to jail if they do that.
Well, there are endless factors in these equations that there's not a one-size-fits-all type situation there. But what it comes back down to is whether or not you're going to have people who are making choices that are going to simplify or complicate their lives. And, the choices that you made after you had your child out of wedlock, which was to buckle down, work hard, raise your child, those were all admirable choices that you made. You had one mistake, but you did the best you could with that mistake. You made your lemonades out of lemon. So you can't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all solution across the board because there's so many complicating factors in it. And it doesn't take into effect that some people are scum, no matter how you look at it. So if you've got, a woman who is doing whatever she can to work the system, I don't find that an admirable quality. But it's the same thing with the man. He's doing everything he can to milk the system. It's not pretty on either side. So, once again, it's a matter of people have to take responsibility for the choices that they've made. Sometimes the choices are not good and have, difficult repercussions like you had, but you did the best you could with it. And
there's a very important thing that needs to be pointed out about what I did. I did not make my husband responsible for me. That's something that's absent in the viewpoint that women can walk away and men can't. Making the man responsible for the woman. And that's what the child support system does, regardless of how well-intentioned it is, regardless of how much it makes people feel better from outside the situation. It really is just making the man responsible for the woman. Because he becomes responsible for her not having to make the tough choices. He becomes responsible for her not having to step up and take adult responsibility. And he becomes responsible for her not having to put herself out there and perform the labor to support the kids. Because she can just rely on a man to do it. And all that does is encourage women to make foolish decisions.
And that's the whole thing, is it when you start having court systems and governments interfering in personal decisions, it skews people's opinions, it skews people's perspectives. Hey, I can get away with it because I'll be supported. Because the court system will make him support me. Because I will get welfare, it goes on and on. When you have government assistance, and I'm not saying, total cutoff because there are times it's necessary, but for there's a huge amount of abuse of the system on both sides of the issue. And there's so many innocent children caught up in it. It's just... Well,
I'm sorry, I hate to cut in, but this is where we get into reproductive rights for men. This is where we get into a situation where a man should have parity of reproductive rights with women they choose to have sex with, just as women themselves choose to have sex with said men. Yeah. There's this huge disparity here. There's this huge differential here. If we and it's so simple to correct. People say it's complicated. No, it's not. Just have it to where you cannot enter into parenthood legally unless you have consented, verbally or in the written word. It just should not happen this way, where one person has sex. Therefore, they become a parent dependent on the other person's decision to become a parent, where the other person can have sex and they don't have to become a parent if they don't want to. This is huge. This is really the crux of the argument. And
but until such opportunities exist for men to be able to control their fertility, the men have to accept reality, which is they could get slammed.
Okay, but women. Here's the thing: women do have control of their fertility, and they still have control over whether or not they become parents, and they can still force a man into parenthood.
And that's why there are men going their own way, because they can get slammed.
And I can't blame them for that. However, it goes back once again: was their life created through their actions?
But life
through
is
their
only
voluntary choices.
Life is only okay. Here, this is
all right.
Creation of life. Does it begin at inception? Does it begin at insemination or at the birth of the child? The fact is, and again, I'm going back to this: every single live childbirth since 1972 has been the result of a unilateral unilateral decision by the mother to become a parent and not the father. This is the critical issue. Go ahead, Anna. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it.
Well, I gotta ask, because it seems that you hold men who would walk away in a pretty low esteem. I mean, you've alluded to considering that abuse of the system. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say abuse of the system, but you are correct in that men who walk away from their own children, I do hold in low esteem. Yes.
Now, I gotta ask, if you consider men who would walk away after a woman has become the custodial single mother of a child that she knew he didn't want, if you consider that man deserving of low esteem from you, what do you think of the mother?
I don't think
who
much of her
knowingly
either.
Put that child in that situation?
Well, see, and when we were talking on this earlier in this phone call, there are women who will entrap men by lying.
Yes.
Oh, of course I'm taken care of. Of course I've got protection. Let's go to bed. And that's just as loathsome because you're playing with fire. You're playing with a child's life.
Don't you think they should pay consequences for that, though? Don't you think that those women should pay consequences, though, where if they decide to do that, then they should take responsibility for that child that they made a unilateral decision to bring into this world, where the guy who had sex...
That's the problem, is how do you prove it? And that's where the whole idea of sex outside of marriage complicates things, because how do you prove it?
Well, you do it by having this instrument of consent where...
Yeah, you can do that, but I don't know a lot of people who are going to say, sign this before we go to bed.
Or after pregnancy or whatever, where you basically have to get the guy to agree in writing that he wanted to become a dad. This is not complicated. This is very simple.
I think giving custody to the fathers would solve that problem, because a woman can't entrap a man into paying her child support if she doesn't have custody of the child.
If she doesn't have a child, right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are all kinds of complications here that...
Yeah.
I'm not a family lawyer here, so I can't discuss all the intricacies, but there are just so many complications that people create through their own actions and irresponsibilities that could be solved if they looked ahead at what their decisions could be.
If you can acknowledge that a woman would know that she couldn't trap a guy if he was going to get custody of the child, would she not also know that she couldn't trap a guy if he could just legally walk away?
Probably.
And she would know that she didn't have a safety net if she lied to him.
Yeah, see, the whole idea of the safety net has been abused by both ends of the system. That it's created far more problems than it has solved. I mean, nobody wants to see mothers and children starve, which was the whole idea for this compassionate idea of a safety net. But what's the term? The unintended consequences of it has been a gross negligence in terms of one's own reproduction.
Now, going on, you can acknowledge that women would be less likely to try to entrap if they knew that they didn't have that safety net because a guy could walk away. Don't you think that women would also be less likely to simply be careless if they knew that they did not have that safety net because the guy could walk away? Women would be more careful if they had to face the consequences.
Well,
the consequences not being a child, but the consequences being having to get a job and support themselves and their child.
Well, that's the whole idea, because before women had these so-called reproductive rights, in other words, before the advent of widely available birth control, it was not, women couldn't control their own fertility either, which is what the men are now saying is unfair. And so they had to look ahead at the consequences of their actions and say, okay, if I go to bed with this guy, I could get pregnant, society will disown me, my parents will disown me, I'm going to be in deep doo-doo, I'm not doing it. And that was, in the 1940s, the 1930s, that was the attitude of most women, saying, I can't risk this.
And today they would simply be more careful.
Well, let's hope. But it has complicated things when you've taken sex outside of its proper context. This is where, you can say I'm old-fashioned, I'm traditional, and you're right, I am. But the fact remains is when sex is used within a proper context, it solves a lot of these issues.
Now, I have no problem with teaching people that they should keep sex within a committed relationship. That doesn't bother me at all. What bothers me is the idea that a man becomes responsible for a woman because she wanted to have sex with him. That bothers me quite a bit, because that's infantilizing women, and it's treating men like they're just disposable, like they're servants of women. And neither of those things is really all that factual. I mean, even before welfare, even before birth control was widely available, there were women who became unwed mothers, and the society had systems in place. In fact, I'm sure everybody's played Monopoly, and you've heard the term community chest. This is something I did not know until I saw an old Andy Hardy reel advertising for the community chest. It was actually a real charity, and in that reel, one of the local organizations that the community chest supported was an organization that helped, they called them wayward women, but unwed mothers, to develop job skills and enter the workplace. So prior to this whole system where they decided that everybody was responsible for the child except the mother, society took women's situation situations when they got themselves into that situation, and we do get ourselves into that situation, and it is, even if it is a two-way interaction, a man can't have sex with a woman without the woman being there doing it too.
And the thing is, too, is the thing that women have to
they
understand
took this
is
situation and turned it into an opportunity to bring these women into adulthood instead of infantilizing them.
Instead of what them? I'm sorry?
Infantilizing them, making them like their children.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah. The one thing that seems to be missing from this equation with women, and this is what another thing that bothers me about the feminist movement, is women create life. That is a biological fact that is inescapable. Yes, they can control their fertility, but the fact remains it's not 100% guaranteed, and you're always going to take that risk. And so women who keep sex within the context of the proper context, which is in marriage, the risk if your birth control fails, okay, we have a kid, no big deal. But the repercussions of women being able to conceive life complicates this whole thing, because we will never be on, quote, equal footing with a man because of that. But it's something that I think is beautiful. I mean, my goodness, you've been a mother, you understand how beautiful it is.
Oh, yeah,
but
it's absolutely beautiful.
To be so casual with it, and to be so people who treat it as if it's a commodity, or who treat it as if it's an income source, are people I don't think need support, because their bad decisions are being supported.
The thing is, we've created a system. We as a society have created a system that does exactly that. Not only does it support the bad decisions of people prone to making bad decisions, but it eclipses how bad those decisions are. So now you have...
Just nailed it on the head.
Now you have young people who are second or third generation, and sometimes, because unwed motherhood often happens in the teens, sometimes fourth generation welfare families who don't know any other way of life, who don't see anything wrong with it, who don't consider poverty a consequence, but rather a fact of their lives, and don't have any reason. They don't have any reason to refrain. Now, that is more a result of the safety net than it is of an attack on morality. And that safety net includes treating the situation as though sex makes the man responsible for the woman.
Yeah, see, you just nailed it. You absolutely summed it up beautifully. And so, the whole idea of a safety net has skewed the sense of responsibility, the importance of the decision, And even the value of the lives created. It has skewed it all. And the unintended consequences has been a cheapening of the sexual act, an inability to keep it within the confines of marriage where it's supposed to be regulated, and it makes both men and women irresponsible in their sexuality.
And it makes men disposable.
Yes.
Ladies.
Oh, horribly
so. I want to stop both of you now. Great conversation. I want to steer the conversation back to male disposability and male utility, because we want to talk about Patrice's article in World News Daily before we end the show, which is coming up very shortly. We've talked about reproductive rights and the fact that the man, and this is a fact, that the man is responsible for a woman's decision to become a parent, and that this is something that is incredibly unfair, even though they have sex, and both men and women have sex, but it is only the man that is the one that's made responsible, to the extent that he must pay every month a certain sum of money, usually based on his income and not the needs of the child. And if he doesn't pay this amount every month, he goes to jail. So there's male utility right there and male disposability. But I would like to sort of steer the conversation between both of you ladies about male disposability. And let's talk about the draft. Let's talk about conscription. Let's talk about male deaths in the workplace. Let's talk about men doing jobs that women cannot, or especially will not do, in order to make things happen. And I just want to throw that out there.
The draft. The one thing I got to say about the draft is that it has no purpose except to facilitate government involvement of the general population, usually the poor, in wars that the population itself does not support. Because generally, if the population
always in the
does,
case of men. Always in the case of men.
And it's always in the case of men. And they'll never convince. If they convince our government to involve women in the draft, it'll get rid of the draft. I don't believe that our society understands the burden. Not all of our society, anyway, understands the burden that really is, until they risk losing, the people that they protect the most. And frankly, women are more protected in our society, far more protected than men.
Which actually makes things difficult under combat situations. I don't have objections to women in the armed forces by any stretch, but there has been proven difficulties under combat, active combat situations where the men find themselves wanting to protect and save their women co-soldiers rather than fighting the enemy, if that makes sense. And sorry guys, that's inbuilt chivalry on the part of men, that urge to protect.
You're trained. That is trained.
Well, actually,
there's an extent. Men protect each other as well. But
yeah,
that is
absolutely.
But also,
if a man comes across,
there is an issue there. There is a evolutionary psychology issue there, where women being the childbearing sex, men are going to be more protective of women than they. Well, there's just a tendency to protect women in this sense. However, women, if they have the right to vote and have all of the rights in society and all the entitlements that society gives them that men have, they should be subject to the same responsibilities. Now, you may not be able to scale a cliff with 60 pounds on your back. You may not be able to drag 240 50-pound men out of a battle zone after they've gotten blown up by shrapnel or a mortar attack or something like that. But you can drive a truck. You can definitely work an office job, which, believe it or not, most military jobs are office jobs. They are. Logistics is the biggest thing about the military. It's always people crunching numbers. It's always people like trying to figure out how to get the most stuff where and whatnot. And again, back to driving a truck. You can drive a truck down a road, and you can get blown up by a roadside explosive, and you can be just as dead as the man sitting next to you, and you will have the same gravestone at Arlington Cemetery as that guy. And you should be obligated to be in that same situation as the guy was if in the instance of a draft. This is the crux of the issue. Women should be forced into military service if their country obliges them to do so. Why? Because they have the right to vote. This is another huge thing, and I think this is so understated in the men's rights movement. People don't talk about this enough, and the reason why is because since women have gotten the right to vote in 1919 or 1920, I can't remember exactly which year it was. It was the 19th Amendment. We have become the most warlike civilization on the face of the planet. Why? Because the majority
for that.
Yeah, the majority of the population, a slight majority, women, can send the slight minority of the population off to war whenever they want. And people talk about this all the time. Oh, women are not as warlike as men. They don't like war. No, well, hold on a second. History is proven otherwise. And also, we've made some really bad foreign policy decisions. We really have. I mean, this entire, quote, war on terror and these terrible mistakes that happened with our second war in Iraq, and there's no doubt about this, it's going to go down in history books as the worst thing we have ever done. Wouldn't this have worked out differently if women had the same obligations that men, even though there was no draft during this time? The threat, this thing hanging over our heads, that men have, that women don't have, don't you think this thing would have been different if women had been subject to the same responsibilities that men do?
Oh, of course.
No, the outrage level would have been 10 times, 100 times. It doesn't justify having the draft, or continuing the draft, but it does justify, well, just the fact of women claiming equality at all justifies making the draft equal.
Well, yeah. That's one of the things that rather annoys me about the so-called equal rights for women is that they want the perks, they don't want the downside. And that's one of the reasons I was saying in the column how I admire men for taking on these ugly, dirty jobs, including being soldiers, that women, even though they have, as you say, the equal right to vote and the equal right to decide who goes to war and how many men are being sent to war, but they're not taking part of that war themselves. So, yeah, there'd be a lot fewer wars if women had to fight the battles. You betcha there would.
But Patrice, do you think that women should have the same responsibility in this regard?
I think they should have the same responsibility insofar as they physically are capable of doing it. As you say, most women can't drag a 250-pound man out of a burning building loaded with shrapnel. But, yeah, if they're going to be saying, I want to join the armed services, then they should be joining the armed services.
I have to say, I don't disagree with that at all.
Okay, good.
Well, I think women should be equally obligated. Although, even though I don't support the obligation to begin with, I think if it's going to exist, women should not be exempt from it.
Correct.
Yes,
I'm very anti-draft, and the draft actually it has been bandied about by politicians for decades, and was at one point eliminated. And Jimmy Carter, I think it was, put it back into play. And I think it was Nixon's administration who started eliminating it before he was impeached. I used to have a comment I could refer to that I could look up about that, but I no longer have the link to it. But so there were 5 years of men who came of age during the time they would have had to sign up for the draft, who didn't have to sign up and they were exempt. And if I recall correctly, that has had no impact whatsoever on any war that we've fought. My thought on the draft really is that it is at this point a moot thing, even if women cease to be exempt from it. The way wars are fought at this point, I don't see men or women being drafted unless we, as a nation, end up involved on a huge number of fronts. We're already involved on multiple fronts, and we're not having to draft.
I'm gonna have to differ with you, Hannah, in a little bit,
see it getting enacted.
Well, here's the thing about the draft: whether or not it's going to be enacted or whether it's not. That is secondary to the fact that men have to go when they turn 18. They have to go to the post office, sign up this form, and send it into the Selective Service, which is run by...
Let me disagree with you. They do not have to unless they are looking for, say, student loans.
No.
Oh, no,
men
face prosecution.
You can go to jail.
And a $200,000 fine.
Not going to go
to jail. I stand corrected then. I beg your pardon. I don't have sons, and so we haven't had to go through this.
That's fine.
Yeah, mine will have to register in a few years.
And beside that, I remember when I was 18 years old, I graduated from high school on my 18th birthday. My twin brother and I, we graduated high school on our 18th birthday. And I remember... The morning we woke up on our 18th birthday, and both of us were quite hungover because we went out and we had a good time. But this is back in the day when 18-year-olds could go and get crazy. Well, not legally, but we did anyway. And I remember my dad waking us up, kicking us out of bed at 9:30 in the morning, saying, "Get up. Get up, get up, get up." My dad served in the Navy. He came from a Navy family, and he literally dragged us out of bed. Get in the car. Why? What's going on here? What? Get in the car. He drove us down to the post office. He did this. My dad did this. And he made us fill out. He said, "You're 18 years old right now. Right now, you are 18 years old. You have to fill out. You're an adult now. You have to fill out this form." This is a true story. You have to fill out this form. It's the Selective Service form, and you have to send it in to your government so you can be susceptible to the Selective Service. If your country needs you to dig a trench, carry a rifle, carry somebody out of a combat zone, drive a ship, man a tank, fly an airplane. You have to do this. You must do this. And we did it because Dad told us to do this. And when we did it, I'll never forget. This is like this old-fashioned post office in Easton, Maryland, on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's a quaint place. And we put it into the mail slot. And my dad said this. He said, "Bill and Bob, congratulations. You are now full-fledged citizens of the United States of America." Now, why don't women have the same obligation? And are women really, truly full-fledged citizens of the United States of America, even though they don't do this? Why is this? Why is there this disparity here? What's going on? We're talking about citizenship here. We're talking about rights. We're talking about responsibilities. We can talk seriously. We can argue about whether or not women are capable of getting into combat. What's going on with that. I don't care. We're talking about a documentation of citizenship.
Actually, there are other countries where there is a similar thing for both sexes.
Yeah, in Israel.
Yeah, I was actually thinking Israel, I think, requires both genders to serve 2 years in the army or something.
Yep, and if I recall correctly, Germany has, it's not the same thing, but has a requirement of public service for all people when they turn 18.
Not here in the U.S.
Barring handicap. Yeah. But, yeah.
But here's the thing. Here in the U.S. and in most countries, if you're a woman, just by turning 18, you become a full-fledged citizen. But if you're a man, you do not become a full-fledged citizen unless you sign a piece of paper and submit yourself to this, to the draft or to conscription or selective service. This is a huge, huge issue. It's not small. It's not esoteric at all. It's huge.
Yeah, it's basically a claim of ownership. That
yes.
That women are free, but men are owned by the government.
Yeah, you are only a full-fledged citizen if you submit yourself to this. If you're a man, if you're a woman, you just have to turn 18. You just have to live to your 18th birthday, and you have this citizenship. There's something basically wrong about that.
Well, see, what you're doing is you're fighting against historical precedent, because that's the way it's been for, arguably millennia. And it's you could call it a remnant, you could call it the Stone Age, leftover, however you want to call it. But that's
you're talking about when women got the right to vote, people said that they were fighting against historical precedent. Isn't that fighting against historical precedent when you're talking about women getting the right to make decisions democratically in society?
Well, yeah, I mean, people, things keep progressing toward the future and such. But if the solution is either one of two things: either you eliminate the draft altogether, or you make it equally applicable to both genders.
Right. And I would okay.
I think the latter solution would lead to the former.
Very likely. Very likely.
Here's the thing.
In which case, I'm for either one.
People talk about like eliminating the draft and eliminating this obligation for randomly selecting people for conscription. History tells a different story, even in this quote advanced age where supposedly there's less warfare, we have more technological and less laborious warfare. I don't think that's true. We're going to face times in our future where there's going to be massive natural disasters. There's going to be war. We can be involved in a huge war at any time in which we need massive manpower to solve the situation. And everybody that has a stake in our government, i.e. the right to vote, should be subjected to conscription. And this idea that we haven't had the draft for 20 years. Well, before that, they didn't have the draft for like 30 years before that. Before that, they didn't have the draft for like another 40 years before that. And that can happen at any time. But
I think what our caller was Hannah, is that your name? Was pointing out earlier is that wars that have been quote unquote popular have not needed the draft. Wars that have been unpopular have. And that in and of itself says something. I seem to remember that when Pearl Harbor, when Pearl Harbor happened, men left, they were eating in restaurants with their families, and they got up and left their food on the plate and went down and registered. Totally, massive amounts of support and response from people who say, okay, I've got what I see as a duty, my country needs me. And I'll say that. Now, of course, this is before women were in the armed services at all. But it was entirely voluntary. As far as I know, and my history could be at fault, there was no conscription necessary during World War II.
There was conscription in World War II, and people died.
But World War II was only necessary because of World War I, and World War I was only possible because, or at least our involvement in World War I was only possible because of conscription.
Yes, as the
had that not occurred, it would have
Civil War.
changed the outcome
This
of
whole
World
thing
War
goes
I.
totally beyond the scope of what my column was about to begin with, which is, how much interference.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, I'm sorry.
But this is where male disposability has caused the absolute worst problems of the world. Everything that's happening today, all of the conflict today, can be traced back to treating men as if they are so disposable that we can let them or send them or make them go die for someone's political motives. That is what is happening today would not be the same as it is if we had never conscripted men to send them overseas to fight in World War I.
Listen, y'all, it's 11 o'clock right now Eastern Time. I have to end the show. This has been a fascinating conversation. Miss Lewis, thank you so much for joining us. I want to express my gratitude on behalf of the listeners of this radio show and the readers of AVFM for you to come on. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And please keep...
You're very welcome.
Yeah, Hannah, thanks for calling in. I wish we had... I wish we could have gotten some other callers in, but this conversation has been very, very, very informative and fruitful. And
thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, anytime. Please call in anytime.
And it was very interesting hearing your perspective. I'm glad you called in.
Well, it was very interesting hearing yours, and it was good meeting you.
Thank you.
I hope you guys keep in touch. This has been a great show. This has been a really great show. I wish Paul had called in, but apparently he was not able to, or we didn't get in touch with him. Either way, it's been a great show. Thanks again, Patrice, for calling in. Hannah, thanks for calling in. James, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yes, I do. Take the red pill.